Hi all, and welcome to the 11th in our shared learning events for the Alliance 16 programme. Just before we introduce our guest speaker today, I'm just going to go over to Andy for some important messages. Thank you, Andy. Next slide. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, all. Next slide. Lovely. So just a little bit from me. It's going to be, we're going to run the same format. For those of you who've been on these meetings previously, we'll run a similar format. So if we could just ask when people are talking, if we could ask for cameras on, if that's possible, and then when not talking, if we could just go to mute. It blocks out some of the background noise, really, so that you can hear Chris. What our plan will be is for Chris to do the presentation, and then we'll run a question and answer session at the end of the session. That just means that we get through the session in a timely way, and we've got time for Q&A at the end. But please do feel free to put comments, contribute thoughts, contribute any good practice that you've got going on in your organisation in the comments box as we go through the questions at the end. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Andy. So where do you start with introductions for our next speaker? Whenever he's introduced, there's always a kind of a word before it. So I'm going to say welcome the formidable Chris Green, our head of informatics for ECIST, and he's going to share with us some information and measurement for improvement and other things. Intriguing, Chris. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And good afternoon. Nice to hear so many people joining with the obligatory Microsoft Teams Bing. It's a bit like if anyone's got a Ring doorbell, whenever you're out and about and you hear a certain chime, you're always aware that somebody's approaching your front door and wonder who that always is. For me, it's probably an Amazon Prime delivery guy, I imagine. So for those people who don't know me, my name's Chris Green. I'm the head of informatics for the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team. I've been doing the job for about 5 years. I've been in the NHS for about 19, which pretty much makes me a whippersnapper compared to some of the other people I work with. But the great thing is that the vast amount of experience that we have as a wider team is a phenomenal thing. My background's all been in healthcare analytics. I've worked for PCTs, CCGs, community social care, and been at NHS, like I say, for about 5 years. So we're going to get through this presentation. I just kind of wanted to start off by, for people who have heard me speak before, either in presentations like this or one-to-ones, I am the king of phrases. I do like a phrase, not only understanding exactly what the phrase is, but also where it originated from. And these are two of my favourite phrases. And the first one's from been attributed to a few people, but I think mainly Albert Einstein. And what he said was, genius is making complex ideas simple, not making simple ideas complex. And this really kind of came about through my first day actually with the team. I went down to the wonderful world of Taunton Racecourse, if anyone's been there. And I heard my boss, actually, Pete Gordon, speak, and he talked about the NHS being a complex adaptive system. And it really stuck with me right from the word go, because a lot of people think that when there is an issue with the NHS, their immediate thought is to actually turn to really complex solutions to this. But actually, it really should be turned on its head. You should actually have a look at some of the complex issues that are being faced. And there's many out there. I'm not going to start to go down that route at the moment, but there are many. And a lot of people will actually think about solving these complex issues with a complex solution. In many cases, that isn't the case. And I also went on a course a few years back about report writing. So unsurprisingly, numbers are more my thing than words. And I went on a report writing course, and the woman running it gave me a great illustration about if you can't explain something simply enough, you don't understand it. And she said, if you want to understand a really, really difficult situation, you could read the Times or the Independent or the Guardian or whatever. But actually, if you have a look at some of the tabloids, what the ability to do from a tabloid perspective is they are able to take a really complex situation, like maybe, for example, what's going on in Afghanistan or something around the pandemic, and they will put it into words that everybody understands. So my dad reads the Times, I try and pick it up every now and then, and they use really, really massively long words. But the problem is sometimes you can't understand those words. So I always say about coming to things from a simple perspective and trying to explain it in a way that everybody can understand. And another one of my favourite phrases, which is a relatively recent one to my catalogue of phrases, is that people don't buy the what, they buy the why. And this kind of came to me from a guy called Simon Sinek, which many people will have heard of Simon, what he does and kind of how he does it. And it really kind of intrigued me as to kind of, you know, why people do certain things. And we're going to start off by having a look at a quick, simple video. So hopefully people can see this okay. Mark, if you could just give me a nod or a shout. So what we've got is we've got this guy dancing. And you can see that he's dancing by himself. And, you know, he doesn't really care kind of what people think about him. He's just having a great time dancing this festival. It's not a particularly big festival. But what you can see is he was dancing by himself and no one really cared about him and he didn't care about what people thought of him. But all of a sudden, this other guy comes along and joins him, starts flapping his arms about. He starts around for a bit of reassurance. You know, can people come and join us because there's only two people dancing? He tries to do a headstand, which quite honestly is rather pathetic attempt at a headstand. But then there's still two people, and this is kind of like an improvement journey in the NHS, that you start off maybe just by yourself. Maybe you get another person coming along trying to find what you're trying to do. And then all of a sudden, we start to get a little bit of a group going on. And this is more my sort of dancing. You can see this is very much an upper body style of movement rather than a lower body. I'm all about that. I'm all about the arms rather than the legs. They're starting to really experiment with some of their dancing. And then all of a sudden, two other people come along. And all of a sudden, you can see that now we're starting to get a real bit of momentum going along. More people joining in and coming along with you on your journey of dancing, or as we would like to put it, in terms of improvement. But we can also kind of put this into perspective in terms of some of the work in my world, which is around data and analytics. We'll often start about something, just doing something by ourselves, but all of a sudden we pick up momentum and we get a group of people behind us, we get operational people involved, we get clinical people involved from all different areas of the organisation that we're working for. And all of a sudden, you've got so many people running along and jumping and trying to get in with you that actually you're actually building up such momentum that you want to kind of come and continue this forward. There's two real reasons why I wanted to show you this video. One is because it is a great example of it's actually about the why. The why is this guy was just having a really, really great time. People saw that and wanted to get involved in it. And the second reason is it's quite a funny video. I really like showing it and I hope you enjoyed that too. So I'm just going to come back to my presentation. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at data in a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to phrase it under the heading of a carrot or a stick. And I want to kind of ask a question about what we actually use data for. Now, that is a very, very general question. And we can use data for all sorts of things. We can have a look at it for health and safety reasons. We can have a look at it from a governance perspective. We can have a look at it for business planning, forecasting, from a financial perspective. But we also use it mainly for performance measurement. And whether that's right or whether that's wrong, we're not going to go into that today. But actually, what I kind of do want to say is that many of the performance measures were born out of a patient safety and outcome measure. And the one which has been in existence for a particularly long period of time, that many of you will be aware of, is the 4-hour standard. So this is the amount of time that patients spend within the emergency department and whether they admitted, discharged or transferred within a 4-hour period. Now, two things I'm going to say, which are kind of the elephants in the room, is that we all know some of the issues which are being faced by almost all organisations within the NHS at the moment and have been over the past 18 months. But the other thing as well is I'm not saying that the 4-hour performance measure is a bad measure at all. So just kind of wanted to put those two things out there. The thing that I do like to say around the 4-hour measurement was that this measure was born from a patient safety and outcome perspective. One of the pieces of data that we use from an ECIST perspective is having a look at distribution profiles within the emergency department. And this is a very standard profile of organisations that we have worked with. This is one particular organisation. I won't share with you which one that is for obvious reasons, but I will say that it's a very typical picture. What we've got on the x-axis, so the horizontal axis, is we've got 15-minute sections, 15 minutes of time in the department. So you can see that some patients leave almost immediately, some patients leave after 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, 60, etc., etc. You can also see where the 4-hour mark is. That is 240 minutes, almost slap bang in the middle of the graph. And we can also see there are significant challenges around patients who spend more than 10 hours in a department, and that's over on the far right-hand side of the horizontal graph, being at 600 minutes. The bars are the number of people within that particular time section over a 12-month period. And the line graph is the really important one. So you probably had a look at distribution profile charts in the past, but the line element of this graph is the really important one. And what that is when a patient is admitted, how long do those patients spend in the hospital? It could be just within the SDEC environment, it could be on an acute assessment ward, or it could be on another acute ward. It doesn't actually break that down into those type of elements, but you've got to remember that this is the whole length of stay of the patients within the hospital. And as you can see, the more time the patient spends within the emergency department, the higher their length of stay. And when I've shown this to organisations in the past, some of the immediate comments are, well, yes, Chris, but actually the patients who spend longer in the emergency department are the more acutely unwell patients. And I say, well, that could well be the case. But actually, patients who are acutely unwell, such as patients who have suffered a stroke, acute MI, fractured NOF, etc., etc., there are very, very good clinical pathways for these patients. And actually, they usually leave the department within 2.5, 3.5 hours. The patients that spend longer in the department have other reasons around that. And like I said, we're not going to go into those right now, but it is important to A, understand what this data is showing, and B, investigate it further to understand the variation. But the next one is what about staff? We often use data, as I said, around performance measures, things around patients, but actually we rarely talk about using data for staff and having a look at our own individual organisations in terms of staff satisfaction, etc., etc. It led me on to another thought, which is people must think I've got some sort of affiliation with Simon Sinek. I actually haven't. It was just a video I came across a few months ago now, where he talked about selecting people for teams, and it kind of really led me onto thinking about this, particularly for the NHS. And I've got a simple graph down here, and on the x-axis I've got trust, and on the y-axis I've got performance. And we were saying about how we select people for our teams. We all want this individual person over here. So this person is high performing and high trust. So not only are they absolutely fantastic at what they do, but they're also a fantastic person. They're the type of person that you wouldn't mind them being a godparent to your children. You'd invite them around for a family barbecue. You go down a pub and have a drink with him, or you go and play some sort of team sport with them. They are the absolute first pick that you would always want on your team. The last pick on your team is the person down in the bottom left-hand corner. Low performance, low trust. Not only do they not know what they're doing, but also you don't even trust them to do that. Somebody could certainly argue it's almost a double negative to that. So actually, if they were low performing, low trust, actually they were quite good at almost everything. Now, that's not the case, particularly in selecting people for a team. So we selected we've automatically grouped these two types of people: high performance, high trust. Definitely have that person. Low trust, low performance, no chance they're in our team. However, we've then got two different groups. We've got a person who's high performing but low trust. So they are fantastic at what they do, but we do not trust them whatsoever. So they would be brilliant sending them into the battlefield in terms of getting the job done. However, they might stab you in the back at the same time, and obviously you don't want that. And actually, when we do select team, actually we're more likely, rather than to go to somebody who is high performing and low trust, to actually selecting these two other people who we really, really trust and respect and value what they do. However, their performance might not be great. Now, you would definitely rather have a person who's high trust and medium performance, and you might even go for somebody who's high trust and low performance. And then I started thinking about, we've got performance data for the NHS in terms of 4-hour performance, cancer 2-week treatments, etc., etc. And we've also got things around from the staff survey. And I wondered whether there was a correlation between the two, whether you could have a look at performance metrics and you could have a look at the staff satisfaction survey to see whether there was a correlation between the two. So I started having a look at the 4-hour performance, which is on the x-axis. And one of the questions in the staff survey is around work-related stress. And the question is exactly, during the last 12 months, have you felt unwell as a result of work-related stress? And every grey dot is every trust in the country, and we do have a trust selected in black. I won't tell you, unsurprisingly, what organisation that is, but they were most challenged in terms of their 4-hour performance for that particular year. What you see is a really good correlation between organisations who are challenged in terms of their 4-hour performance also have a high percentage of staff who have suffered work-related stress, and organisations that are achieving or performing quite well in this particular area, over on the right-hand side, we have a low performance level of stress. The interesting one is if we take that one stage further and then have actually look around teamwork, and this shows us a very interesting story as well. So yes, we do have a lot of stress. However, organisations who are most challenged over on the left-hand side, looking at the question which is related to, even though you don't feel very well, are you still going into work? It's actually very high on organisations who are challenged, i.e., although I don't feel particularly well, I'm still going to go into work because I've got that kind of collaborative working, I can't let my team down. That's not obviously good for our staff, but it is very interesting in terms of the amount of teamwork. And it's just something to bear in mind that when having a look at data, don't just look at crude performance metrics around outcomes. Actually have a look at the overall picture, including some of the work relating to staff satisfaction. So let's get started and go to the next phase. So for people who haven't used Menti before, could you either use your smartphones to scan that QR code and it will take you to the Menti questionnaire, or you can also go onto menti.com and use that code. I'm just going to go over to it now and have a look here. So people can also use the QR code there, or like I say, go on to www.menti.com, enter the code, and that should take you directly there. Go on to that now as well. And okay. So let's go for the first question. And we're already starting to get a few answers back in here. When you think about data or analytics, what comes to mind? I've used the word data. I love that. Somebody's used an emoji. Check that person out. I'm not seeing that one in there before. But like I say, I've been doing this job for about 19 years, and the really interesting one for me is that I've seen every type of kind of person around this. I've seen people who are kind of like going, actually, I don't understand it, and I'm quite happy not knowing about it. However, there's also other people that I've seen that have just gone, well, this is really interesting. I want to express this one, I want to get this one even greater. Once again, coming back to my phrases, it's one that I will say about is don't worry about your weaknesses, just make your strengths stronger. But in terms of data, it can be used for so many different types of things. I think it's really important to try and get your head around the use of data and what you can potentially use it for. I'm going to leave that question up, but I'm just conscious of time, so I want to kind of get through to the other questions. So let's have a look at the next one. So how often do you look at data? Now, I'm going to be expecting quite a lot of different answers to this one, because some people you could look at it very, very frequently. Some people hardly look at it at all. And so I'm not surprised that we're getting a lot of people daily. We've also got a couple of people only when I need to. And thankfully, although famous last words, nobody's put never as yet, which is great, because data does cover a whole multitude of sins. So actually, I'd be surprised if nobody clicked never. The next question we've got going on is, what do we use data for now? So bearing in mind what I was just talking about and having a look at performance measures, also having a look at other areas such as staff satisfaction. I think it's really important that we try and understand what we use data for. I've also specifically used the word data rather than information. People often get confused between the two things, and so I thought I'm going to stick with the word data. Everybody understands that terminology, but I hope everybody also understands that they're very interchangeable words between data and information. And then the last question is your data skills. So I'd like people to be honest about this. I once did a survey, actually it was only a couple of months back now, to understand exactly where everybody was. And what I want people to just kind of be really confident about is how confident they are in using data. Equally, some of the issues around using some of the statistical techniques. So SPC is very big on the agenda at the moment, but there is a big difference between it being big on the agenda and people looking at it and the ability that people have in terms of understanding it. So I'm not surprised that we're kind of getting a very average position in terms of SPC or other statistical techniques. In fact, that's going down. I'd also say about I know who my analysts are. If you don't know who they are, well, it's one of those things. Go and hunt them down. They're probably in a dark room somewhere, apart from me, because I do like to get out and about and meet people. But go and find out who they are, because they are going to be incredibly valuable people to know and understand. So thanks very much for partaking in the Menti survey. I'm going to have a look at those results a little bit later on and try and see if we can resolve some of those issues, and particularly have a look at some of the words that are coming up through the data question. So I'm just going to go back to having a look at the slides now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the measurement for improvement methodology and some of the slides that I've used in the past. I'm not going to dwell on them too much because I have talked about them particularly on the A16 launch event, and so I don't want to particularly go through some of the other issues. I would rather move on to actually using what data for. But for those people that aren't aware, there's a 7-step approach to measurement for improvement. Deciding your aims, choosing your measures, defining your measures are kind of there's two quite distinct sections within the 7-step process. So deciding my aim, choosing your measures, defining your measures is one, and then collecting, analysing, reviewing and repeating the step as kind of the second section as well. And that's kind of a very repetitive cycle that you can potentially go on to have a look at your improvement journey. These slides will be coming out. I'm sure either Mark or Andy will be sending these slides out so that everyone's got access to this. Once again, even though there's some stuff on there around staff survey, there's no identifiable organisation, so please feel free to share them as you will. But the measurement for improvement journey is something which is dear to a lot of our hearts, because the improvement journey is something which never stops. What we also like to do is we like to kind of present data back. So the ECIST UEC dashboard, which comes out on a Monday and a Thursday, has a measurement for improvement right at the heart of it. It will take data which is already collected, so it's not a data burden exercise. We haven't got to ask for additional data from organisations. But what it does do is it does take the data that you provide on a daily basis, puts it into a measurement for improvement approach, and then presents it back to you. So it goes out to around about 3,000 people on a daily basis. So it used to be daily when the pandemic was at its height. Thankfully, it's not there, and hopefully won't get back to those crazy heights. It now comes out on a Monday and a Thursday afternoon. And what it will do, the grid up in the top section will show you the top 16 urgent emergency care metrics. We'll have some demand metrics over on the left, which is looking at the amount of patients that are arriving through the front door, split by walk-in and ambulances. We've then got some process measures in the middle, which is looking at ambulance handovers, 4-hour performance. And then we've got some outcome measures at the end, which is looking at occupancy levels, number of patients with a long length of stay, etc. And as I said, using measurement for improvement methodology, it will automatically identify areas that are statistically significant. So you can see grey squares, black circles and green diamonds. A grey square is indicated that there is no statistical significance whatsoever. A black circle is where it has seen something statistically significant this week and it's done something that we don't want it to do. And a green diamond has been identified as statistically significant and done something we do want it to do. And what this will enable us to do is it will enable us to dig into it further. And what you can then do is, if, for example, you said, well, actually, I want to have a look into attendances and I want to see why there has been such a significant increase in this case, you can then use the statistical process control chart, and it will help you identify what has been happening historically and what has been happening over the past few days to trigger either the special cause concern or the special cause improvement. So the graph is automatically updated. You're looking at the past 100 days worth of data. The reason why it's 100 days, there's twofold. One is this is only meant to be a short to medium term improvement tool. And the second one is probably the silliest reason, and that's because 100 is a nice round number. There's no rhyme nor reason why I selected 100 days. It's just because there are other tools that will allow you to look over a longer period of time, but this one we wanted to keep to it to a relatively short time frame. You can use the drop-down box on the left-hand side of the graph to select any metric within the emergency care SITREP. That could be attendances, ambulance handovers, long length of stay patients, any metric that is automatically collected, and it will automatically create a statistical process control chart. But having a look at the results that came out of the question that I just asked on the Menti, actually, I think that is something that could be and should be explored further. We've got lots of documentation around statistical process control, and I'm sure that when we send this slide deck out, we can send that around to everybody just to familiarise yourself with what SPC is and how it can be used. SPC can also be used to identify patterns. So here, for example, we've got the whole country's SPC chart for occupied beds, and you can see there is quite a significant pattern with the increase in beds happening over early midweek and tailing off on a Thursday and Friday, and significantly falling away on a Saturday and Sunday. When I say significantly, I just mean from the baseline position of the Tuesday and Wednesday. So not a massive drop. However, you can see that nice cyclical pattern through the week. You do also need to be careful about not putting SPC into everything. So what I've done here is I've just highlighted the particular issue around COVID beds occupied, and particularly going back to the kind of around late autumn, early winter from last year going into November, where we started to see that significant rise in beds occupied. But you can see that because the movement, the daily movement in this particular chart is not significant, the upper and lower control limits are very, very narrow. And it's just something to really bear in mind that SPC is great, but you do need to be aware of the pitfalls and that you can't SPC everything. We'll also help to identify variation. So once again, we're having a look at a scatter plot graph. We're having a look at the beds occupied metric against the long length of stay metric to help us to identify organisations who may have seen some sort of improvement in terms of this data, but then more importantly, understanding what that improvement was and why it was put in place. Importantly, coming back to that phrase I said right at the beginning, people buy the why, they don't buy the what. You can have a look at this and it will tell you the what, but you won't convince somebody by that. You will convince them by saying, this is why we did it and this is how we did it. It'll also allow you to have a look at flow. So in the NHS, we're fantastic at just having a look at one metric in particular. So we'll just have a look at attendances, or we'll just have a look at occupied beds. But what we really want to be able to understand is actually, well, occupied beds have seen a significant increase. And oh, look, that's been really interesting that it's compromised flow. So we've not been able to see as many patients within the first 60 minutes, as an example. And we can see that on this particular graph. So if we have a look at this for the whole of the London region, once again, on your dashboard, you'll be able to do this for your region. You'll be able to do that for your whole organisation. And if you have more than one site, you'll be able to have a look at your individual sites as well. But this particular graph has a look at the composite metrics of flow. And I've just selected here the time to treatment. So that's the percentage of patients treated within the first 60 minutes of arrival, which is the red line. The black line, which is our long length of stay numbers. So that's number of patients in hospital with a length of stay of 21 days or more. The blue line, which is our 4-hour performance, and the green line, which is our overall beds occupied. The interesting one that we've got down here is that as our beds occupied, the green line, and our long length stay patients started to increase, you can see how this compromised flow. And if we particularly have a look at around about the August time of last year, the ability to treat patients in a timely manner through our emergency department was significantly compromised, and that really challenged around about the same time in August to start of September, where we started to see that significant decline in the proportion of patients treated within the first 60 minutes. This graph will also allow you to have a look at rates of change as well. So you might have, for example, thought that your beds occupied, which is my green line, and my long length stay line, which is my black line, you might expect those two graph lines to grow at the same rate. But what we can see is that actually from late stages of August going into September, what we can actually see is that our rate of change for our long length of stay has increased. So they are disproportionately occupying more beds than the rest of our occupied beds. It might be something to do with discharge, it might be something to do with the acuity of patients. But what it would allow you to do is it would then allow you to have a look at those particular type of patients and take that to the next level. So now we've understood data, we've started to have a look at it and dig into a bit more detail. We understand the variation in terms of attendances, what is going on there, looking at occupied beds. What else can we do with it? So there's already dashboards out there that will tell you, that this is statistically significant. But actually what I'm more interested in is, particularly if we take that point I was just talking about, which was the being compromised in terms of flow through the emergency department. What we started to work on with more and more organisations is particularly around ED staffing. And there are kind of two elements to this. So one is the ED staffing, which is kind of having a look at functional capacity. And the other area is around physical capacity. And when I mean physical capacity, I'm looking at beds, trolleys and chairs in the rest of the hospital. So we're going to have a look at two of the models now. I'm going to explain what they do, how they do it, why they do it. Once again, getting back to that point. And I'll happily take any questions as we go through this presentation. So if you do have any questions that you would like to ask about this, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we can go through them at the end of the presentation. So if we start to have a look at this, and I'll come back once again to the phrase I said right at the beginning, which is about simplicity from complexity, kind of paraphrasing Einstein there, as I'm entitled to do. And I've seen many different ED staffing models out there, and there are loads, and I'm not saying that this is the Oracle one that you absolutely have to go to this, but what we tried to do is we've tried to keep this very, very simple. I've seen ones where you have to put in loads and loads of different data in loads of different tabs and this, that and the other, and click here and click there. Some are web-based, some are not. What I've tried to do is I've kept this one into Excel because two reasons: most people have Excel and most people know how to use it. But what this tool allows you to have a look at is it relies on three variables. The first variable is the amount of patients that come in through the front door by hour of day and by day of week. The second variable is how many staff you have on at each hour of each day. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. This model is designed for senior clinical decision-making staff. This is not meant for HCAs, porters, as an invaluable job as they do. This model is just meant for senior clinical decision makers. You can define who that is for your own organisation. And particularly when we have a look at the third variable, which is productivity per hour for that individual staff groups. And I cannot stress this enough. It has to be realistic to your own organisation. I've worked with probably about 40 organisations now around ED staffing, and I have seen everything in terms of productivity of patients per hour. And you can see, and this is an organisation. I'm just double checking. I don't think I've put their name on here, which is good. This is their realistic productivity of patients per hour. So they've put their consultants as 0.43 patient per hour, middle graders 0.8, juniors 0.9, etc., etc. This does not line up with the data that has come out from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine or Royal College of Nursing, but I've had conversations with them before, and they are also of the opinion that it needs to be a realistic representation of what's happening in your department. Now, with this particular organisation, we put in there the demand, we put in there their capacity in terms of the amount of staff they have on, and we put in their productivity, and it kicks out two visualizations. One is the graph in the top right, and the second one is the table in the bottom left. Now, in reality, they're saying exactly the same thing, but some people like to see it a bit more visual and some people like to see it a bit more numerical. If we just have a look at the graph, though, for example, The graph will show that on the x-axis, you've got each hour of the day, and each hour has got 7 bars. And those 7 bars represent every day of the week, so that we can understand if there is a difference between a Monday, a Wednesday, a Saturday, a Sunday, etc., etc. And what you can see, particularly for this organisation, is if the bar is below the line, below 0, that's where they have a gap in terms of their ability to meet their demand. If the bar is above the line, above 0, that's where they have technically a surplus. Now, the interesting one is when we worked with this organisation, they were adamant that their issue was around the latter stages of the afternoon going into early evening. But what you can see is actually they had a significant shortfall all the way from 9 o'clock in the morning all the way through till 5, 6 o'clock at night. But they were really quite clear. They were going, no, it just doesn't feel like that actually, Chris. We've looked at this more. The anecdote is saying that, we really experienced this. So what I then started to have a look at was look at data in a slightly different way. I started to have a look at 2 things. One, which is the total number of patients in the department, which is on the left hand graph, and the time to treatment, which is the right hand side of the graph. And what I showed them then is because you've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you can see that from the hours of 9, where the gap in the ability to meet the patients starts to appear, their queues, their total patients department, continually increases. Once again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day of the week, their queue continually builds. And not only that, their wait time continues to build. So if a patient comes in at 9 o'clock, their average wait time is 45 to 50 minutes. But you can see that that builds all the way through each day of the week. Once again, Tuesday, 40 minutes, builds all the way through to 6, 7 o'clock, where they were waiting at least an hour to be seen by a senior clinical decision maker. And the reason we started to have a look at this even further was because the anecdote didn't match up with the evidence. But when we started to have a look at data in a slightly different way, and particularly in this way, we started to identify when the problem manifests itself, not when the problem starts. By showing this data, I was able to then say and work with the team to say, actually, your problem starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, but you're not experiencing it until the latter stages of the afternoon going into the evening. So just once again, using data in a timely and effective and efficient manner to help prove, in this case, what they already knew, changing their minds in terms of the data and what it was showing, that enabled them to say, actually, we do need to make a change in terms of our rotas. And in this particular instance, they also needed to write a business case around additional staffing requirements. So that's the functional side of demand and capacity. And once again, these models are all free. If anybody would like a copy of that, please let us know. But then if we start to have a look at inpatient activity, we can then have a look at the amount of time. So once again, the 2 variables are exactly the same. We've also got a third one around capacity. But the first graph on the left-hand side is the amount of patients that have been seen. I would stress that this model is not an operational bed model. It's more a strategic one. So from an operational perspective, it will not tell you how many beds you need tomorrow and Friday and Saturday and Sunday. It will tell you how many beds you're going to need next month and the month after and the month after. It uses a relatively simple predictive model to forecast going forward, and it will forecast for the next 18 months. Once again, so it won't tell you by day how many beds you will need, but it will tell you how many beds you need, for example, over winter next year and going through to the latter stages of summer and autumn into 2022. It's probably been used by about 35 to 40 organisations around the country over a number of years, tried and tested. In fact, I'm working with a trust in the Northwest this morning on exactly the same thing. What it will do is it will, if we have a look at the patients graph in the top left, we've got the historical line, which is the blue line. It will then use that historical data to forecast going forward. So we've got the blue line, which is the historical. We've got the black line, which is our prediction model. Exactly the same thing for length of stay. So the blue line is historical length of stay. The black line is forecasted. And then you can see we've got a variable as well around capacity. Now, the Nuffield Trust and the King's Fund a few years ago wrote a paper around levels of occupancy level and what is a sufficient level of occupancy to have good flow through the department. I know the economics team have done a fantastic piece of work in NHS I&E around looking at exactly the same thing. But I've put that in as a variable. So you might want to plan at a 90% occupancy. You might want to plan at a 92% or 95%. You simply overwrite the 90% with the occupancy level you would like to plan at, and it would automatically adjust the model to cater for that occupancy level. So because we've got our patients, we've forecasted that, we've done exactly the same thing for length of stay, and we've done the same thing for beds required. We can then see in the bottom right-hand corner that if happens what we think is going to happen, this particular organisation will be consistently short of beds going through winter next year of around 40 to 60 beds at a 90% occupancy level, of course. What you can also then go through is you can also then start to have a look at the mitigating factors around, okay, so if our 60 bed, if we do have a 60 bed gap in medicine, what are we going to do around that? Now, the old ECIST bed model that I created only had the ability to have a look at a few different scenarios, but in the new bed model, you have the ability to put in there up to 50 different scenarios, and I just put in a few random ones here. And so what you might say, for example, particularly there's a big strive at the moment around elective recovery work. So what you can then do is kind of say, well, actually, for medicine, for cardiology, our current demand has gone down by 35% because of what's been happening over the past 18 months. But actually, we don't think it's going to go down by 35%. We actually plan to do 20% more activity, which will assist us with our RTT recovery. We might also do something around general medical, non-elective patients. We're going to put more patients through our same-day emergency care activity. But you can literally put in here whatever you want to. There's two things you can do. You can also put in a change to the demand profile, so the forecasting, but you can also make a change to your length of stay. So, for example, on the second scenario down, I've put an increase in patients through my same-day emergency care. Because we're putting more patients through that, we would expect our length of stay to come down. So our non-elective general medical current length of stay is 5.2 days. We think that because we're going to put more patients through this particular area, our length of stay is actually going to come down by half a day. What this will then do is it will take into account the historical forecasting that I showed you on the previous slide. It will then have a look at the changes and the scenarios you've put into this scenario selection. And then you can see over on the bottom right-hand side, and I'll draw your attention to the far right-hand side of the graph, where each month has got a grey line and a black line. The grey line will be, if we do nothing, you will continually be short of beds by about 60 beds. However, if you do what you say you're going to do and you reduce your length of stay and you increase your demand in particular areas, instead of being 60 bed gap, you'll actually only have a 20 bed gap. And that's when you can start to mitigate the differences between what will happen and what might happen if you can make those improvement elements to the data and the workforce and the capacity that you're going to see. So in summary, and definitely drawing on from the response that I got from the Menti questions, was take the time to find your analysts. Okay, not only will it benefit you, but it will massively benefit them. It's bridging that gap from just taking raw data, raw numbers, and putting it into something meaningful is incredibly powerful, and something which we should try and do more and more to help particularly identify areas for improvement. Work out the why you are doing what you are doing. So really have a look at, I'm doing it because of this particular element. So this particular thing I was doing this morning, we're already identifying why we're going to do it before what we're going to do. There always has to be a reason why you are doing something. What data can you use to show your improvement? So having a look, the NHS is absolutely awash with data. We've got data coming out of our ears, but actually identifying the definitions for it, what you want to show and why you want to show it is absolutely vitally important. Then actually using that data to see what it is showing, using certain techniques such as statistical process control and other areas that I've looked at and will be pointing you to is incredibly powerful, but it should be to identify the work that you've done and the difference that has been made. And then also, if we start to have a look at data, we've understood it, we've started to have a look at some of the techniques, what else can we use some of the data for? So some of the modelling that I showed you around about, but that can also help you with RTT recovery work as well. But also draw your attention to the staff survey results and the against the performance measures that I've shown. Pete Gordon and myself wrote a blog recently. Please feel free to go and read that. I think it's very powerful, and we're starting to have a look at some of the other areas that we can take this one into as well. My email is chrisgreen@nhs.net if anyone does have any questions. I'm also on Twitter at chrisgreen_nhs if anyone wants to heckle me. And happy hand over to Andy for his plenary.
Brilliant, Chris, thanks for that. As always, and as Mark said at the beginning, brilliant presentation and delivered in an interesting and fascinating way, so thank you. We've had one question in the chat box, Chris, which Alison, just to warn you, I'm probably going to bring you in here just to give it a bit of context, if that's okay with you. How accurate is the productivity element, and how do you address the variables in individual performance? I missed which elements Chris was talking about when you posted that, Alison. If you could just give that a bit of context, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm just thinking about ED and the variance in the staff seniority, and also individuals. Some can make quicker decisions than others, and then again, I suppose if you have got a mixture staff, particularly throughout the day, it's usually more experience rich. Compared to nighttime, it'd be more isolated, and maybe the senior decision maker has more support to give to junior staff. And it's crazy busy, etc. So how do you sort of build all of those sort of elements in, which do make a big difference to the outcome at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's kind of two elements to your question there, Alison, which is a great one. The productivity numbers, there's an easy way and a hard way to do this. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to direct you to the easy way. I'll explain the reasons for that. The hard way is that trying to get data out of a system. Some organisations might be able to do this, and that's fantastic. However, the vast majority of organisations that I've been to are not able to, and that is extracting the data that will enable you to prove people's productivity. However, I would stress that is not an individual productivity number. This is not an individual performance management thing. This is how many patients per hour can your whole consultant body see? Can your middle grade see? This isn't Andy can see this, Chris can see that. If you can get raw data out of the system to help look at productivity numbers, then absolutely fantastic. The vast majority of organisations that I've worked with, we work with the clinical lead and the nurse lead as well to say, what do you think is an appropriate level of productivity for your particular organisation? So that is the way that I would direct that. The other point to your question, Alison, which was around particularly you mentioned supervising. So if there are staff that are supervising and or for example, one of your consultants could be a physician in charge, they are not, or they shouldn't, but maybe sometimes they do, they shouldn't be seeing patients. So they should not be included in your capacity because they technically cannot see patients. Once again, if you've got a member of staff who is supervising, technically their productivity is zero because the person they are supervising will be the person that is actually making decisions for those patients. So go down the anecdote route of the productivity and then also have a look at the amount of staff that actually see patients and those that do another important roles such as physician in charge or supervising. But that should also be put into the capacity where you say my consultants, I might have 2 working, for example, from, I don't know, 10 until 6 or whenever, but actually 1 supervising for a particular certain number of hours, and you can make that change within the capacity element of that tool. And I'm more than happy to go through that with anybody at any point. We do have a YouTube video actually around with Dan Bowden and myself going through the ECIST ED tool.
Thank you, that's really helpful, thanks.
No problem, Alison.
Good question, Alison, great question. So guys, there's no more questions in the chat box, but what we'll do is open it up to the floor really. So if anyone has any questions, if we can just ask for a kind of Teams virtual hands up approach, and then I'll take them in order. But any questions to Chris from the floor? This is where I leave a lengthy silence so that people can.
People are hunting around for the tumbleweed emoji.
I think you've nailed it, Chris. That's the issue. I think you've nailed it. Jyoti, you've got your hand up. Yeah, please do.
I'm Jyoti Nimpani. I'm a National Clinical Lead for Reducing In-Hospital Length of Stay and also a Clinical Director in ECIST. It's not really a question, it's a comment really. I use the database which Chris has just shown whenever we do any PDSAs. So if you're doing any trials in your organization with Flow, you don't have to ask beg your IT teams to give you data. It'll reflect on this data very clearly, and this is available just like that. You just have to ask Chris, and he'll put you in the distribution list, and you can access this data for your organization. So it'll be really useful without having to worry about data collection. It's there for you.
Great, thanks for the plug, Jyoti.
And so it doesn't look like there's any more questions. If there isn't, I'll just give it a couple more seconds. But if there aren't any more questions for Chris, then I'll hand back to Mark to close. Back to you, Mark, I think.
Thanks, Andy. So that concludes our 11th shared learning event for Align 16. We have another 6 shared learning events left before we embark on the next phase of our program between September and March next year. We'll be sharing some information on that in due course. But our next shared learning event will be with Liz Lees-Deutsch, our ECIST clinical associate, and Liz will be talking about publishing and editing, one of our ambitions at the beginning of the program. So on behalf of Sharon, Andy, Chris and myself, we wish you well and thank you for spending